they become dependent on you because you're the only one who can provide it to them. And you don't want that, because then again, you have one supplier that you can source this innovation from, which means you don't have power in the relationship. And buyers just hate not having power in the relationship. So one of the key things that we were always trained to do in FMCG is understand who are your suppliers. And if you only have one, add more. And if you can't add more, simplify your specification so you can add more.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. If you are trying to penetrate an account, the involvement of their procurement department is the last thing you want to see, as they are hard negotiators on price. Selling to FMCG buyers could even be more challenging, as they need to move fast and make quick decisions. In 2021, most offerings are fairly competitive, so you could only do so much while negotiating with FMCG buyers. However, if you researched enough and figured out how to sell based on value, you might end up converting your accounts into strategic with a significant upper hand. In today's episode, we have our guest, Mark Schenkius, who discusses selling to and negotiating with FMCG buyers with buying environments where they need to make quick decisions and move fast. He also describes several negotiation profiles with the help of blue and red colors, and how to convert blue to red and vice versa. Finally, he describes the negotiation color of various departments and what sales and procurement teams can do to win negotiations. Let me introduce Mark to you. Mark is the founder of ROI10, a globally operating training and consultancy firm focused on making you successful in negotiations and sales. He has worked for Mars Incorporation for over 17 years in a variety of procurement functions, and has extensive experience providing training to both sales and procurement professionals. He is also a lecturer in business economics at Fontes University of Applied Science and author of The Other Side of Sales, which gives sales professionals unique insights into the mysterious world of buying. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure being here.
Of course, my pleasure as well. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and current focus, Mark?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I've been working at the company Mars, the chocolate manufacturer, for about 17 years. And since 3 years, I set up my own company. I've been working as a buyer for 15 years at Mars, so I pretty much know how buyers think. And in the last 3 years, I've tried to use that knowledge to help sellers, the sales profession, become more professional. So teaching them how to deal with buyers, especially difficult buyers, I would say.
Yeah, interesting background there. And obviously, we are going to dig into the buyer psychology, and that is very deep, the way they think. So I think this is going to be a very compelling episode. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions that every guest has to answer, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth, Mark.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting topic. I mean, if you ask any business, growth is probably their number one priority. And as a buyer, the question has always been, how can you contribute to growth? Because most buyers are interested in costs, to drive bottom line. But if you reverse that thinking, actually a seller has to deal with buyers. So from a selling perspective, you need to know how to deal with buyers to deliver growth. And that's exactly where I can help with. So and that's also what I'll be sharing some stories about today, is how as a seller can you get into the mind of a buyer? Because once you know how a buyer thinks, you can actually be more successful and grow your business. It's almost that simple.
Yeah, you definitely hit on a very important point there. Just thinking from the perspective of your customer, it is often very hard for people. So reversing that process, just living their life and visualizing what they are going through on a daily basis is crucially important to get through these buyers. So let's talk about, I think you do a lot of work in the FMCG space, and I don't know if you want to start with a story. We are looking to know how FMCG buyers are different from the other buyers. And since in the FMCG space, my assumption and understanding is going to be that FMCG buyers are going to be slightly tighter overall from the margin perspective. So obviously they are going to think very different from the other buyers. So Mark, do you want to share some behavioral characteristics that you have seen from FMCG buyers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the right spot. So FMCG buyers are typically different than other buyers. And I think where's the difference? It's probably the F in FMCG, which is fast moving consumer goods. So it's a fast cycle. So buyers need to make a significant amount of decisions every single day. So, and actually most of them just learn tricks, how to put pressure on sellers continuously. And let me share a story with you that illustrates that quite well. So I met with a supplier, it was a medium-sized company, and they were dealing with a large FMCG customer. Right, this customer was significantly larger than this supplier. So automatically, the supplier already felt they had less power than this customer. And actually, what happened? This customer, they had a service agreement, and this customer was asking more than they contractually agreed. So they were asking additional services to be provided, higher volumes, everything that more than actually was in the contract. So what happened? The supplier then decided, you know what, I'm going to invoice those additional costs that I made because I want to provide a service to them. And they sent them an invoice. And months passed, and none of the invoices was paid. And then he reached out to the supplier and said, what's happening? Why are you not paying the invoices? And the supplier said, well, we didn't agree anything on this. So for me, that's just additional service that you decided to do. The supplier said, hold on, you asked me to do all of this. And actually, so I met this supplier when he had 8 months of sleepless nights. I'm not kidding. So he couldn't get his invoices paid. He tried everything, nothing worked. He called senior people, and he just couldn't get through. The customer just wouldn't pay those invoices. And of course, they had more power. That was the perception of the supplier. So I sat down with the supplier, and we agreed on a plan of action. So how can we actually get your money? This was a significant amount of money for this supplier. And actually, what happened? So the approach we took, and I'll explain exactly what we do in a couple of seconds. But after 2 days, the customer said, "Okay, I'm going to pay," and in a week they actually received the money. And he was completely surprised. What happened? So what happened actually is we analyzed the buyer. We analyzed the buyer and the buying situation they were in. And what I typically start with is it's a very simple tool that everybody can apply. And I talk about blue chairs and red chairs. And a blue chair is basically when you're negotiating, you're sitting on a chair, you're sitting at a table. When you're sitting on a blue chair, it's a very cold negotiation. So it's very much price focused, no relationship, short term. When you buy something on eBay, you don't care about the other party. You care about just getting the best result yourself. That's very blue behavior. Red behavior, on the other hand, is where you do care about the relationship. So it's not just about price. It's about working together, creating something great, long-term relationship, partnership, all these kind of things. And actually, the color of the chair is determined. The color of the table is determined by the color of the chairs. Because when there's two people on blue chairs, the table is blue. That's quite easy. When two people are on red chairs, the color of the table is red. I think the difficulty is when you have a blue chair and a red chair. When one party is blue, just focusing on price, the other party is red, talking about long-term partnership. Blue will be asking, red will be giving, but the table is actually blue. It's a very cold negotiation. And this was the situation with this specific customer. And this supplier. The supplier was very red. They wanted partnership, long-term relationship, whereas the customer was very blue. They were very interested in just not paying the money and short-term results because they believed they had more power. Therefore, the table was blue. And actually, when the table is blue, you only have two options to do. If you're on a red chair and the table is blue, you can do two things. You can actually try to make the other chair red, so the table becomes red. So the negotiation becomes warm again. which is hard to do because you need to convince the other party it's better to be red than it is to be blue. That's a hard thing. The other thing you can do is actually become blue yourself, recognizing I'm negotiating at the blue table, I'd better be blue.
Yeah.
But what happens is when you become blue, obviously you become into this kind of power game. Yeah? So one who has most power wins the negotiation, and so that's something we analyze. So what is the preference? And of course the preference was to make the other party red, but he had tried that already. So the supplier already tried that many times and it was unsuccessful. So we said, okay, then the only option we have is to become blue ourselves. But then we need to have more power in the relationship. And having more power means understanding the pressures of the other party. So what pressures were they under? And when we did that analysis, it turned out that this customer had huge quarterly pressures to deliver sales targets. It was linked to their bonus schemes. So if they wouldn't deliver their targets, they would not have a bonus for that quarter. The entire organization would not have a bonus for that quarter. And actually the service that the supplier provided was crucial for making this, achieving these targets. So all we did was say the following sentence. It said, from today onwards, we will only commit to our contractual agreements and we won't do anything else anymore.
Yeah.
And he knew that by saying that, the customer had a significant issue because they needed significantly more than the contractual agreed services that they had. And they knew that this was going to impact their sales targets by the end of the quarter. And they knew that they had a very tough story explaining to the entire organization why their supplier didn't deliver and they didn't achieve their sales target. And just this pressure, showing that actually the supplier had more pressure, more power in the relationship than the buyer, made them turn around. And actually, they acknowledged, and in the end they said, okay, we're going to pay the invoices. Just make sure you deliver the service that we need. And the funny thing even is that as a result, they've now recognized that actually the supplier has significantly more power than they assumed, and they became more red in the relationship as well, recognizing we need to work in partnership because that will get better results for both of us. And so even by becoming blue, just very briefly, made the relationship turn red.
Oh wow! Okay, so that's a fascinating story. And talking about blue versus red, and all those colors sitting on the same table. And if there is going to be just one blue, then there is a chance that both of them are going to be turning blue. So, which is a very fascinating analogy there. So I want to dig slightly deeper into this story. So when we are looking at the buyers, and buyers, in my experience, do understand the importance of suppliers. Now, I don't know if they sort of appreciate which supplier is going to be strategic and which supplier is not going to be as strategic. So if in this particular case, those services could mean missing their quarterly bonus, do you know if they just were not aware that if they didn't pay and if they missed on those services, they would not be able to meet their quarterly targets? Because in this particular case, it just does not make much of a sense. Why would you not pay invoices when your quarterly bonus and the performance is actually dependent upon those services?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great question. So there's one decision actually that should make a buyer either blue or red. So blue being really cold, short term. At the risk of generalization, buyers are typically blue, right? They're very much focused on price and cost reductions, etc. So they're typically blue. But there's only one reason why a buyer should be red, and that's linked to dependency. If a supplier is dependent on one supplier, they're better off being red because they have nowhere else to go. In a market where there's hundreds of suppliers, they can afford to be blue because, if you don't play ball, someone else will. And what buyers typically do, even though they are dependent on one supplier, they always try to create the illusion by showing there's additional competition out there, which gives them almost like an option to be blue. And this is why buyers run tenders. A tender is and I think it's called RFPs in the US typically. When they run RFPs, they call it tenders in Europe. So, and that's why they run RFPs, because in an RFP, they are basically saying, well, there is plenty of competition, so I have lots of options. I can afford to be blue, even though there might not be a lot of competition at all. But they like having this perspective. So in this particular case, they also showed as if they had power, even though they didn't really have that level of power, because they were pretty much tied with their hands to this one supplier. But they create the illusion that they had many options to choose from.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story overall. So let's go back to your comment about the FMCG being slightly faster or really fast, where they have to make tons of decisions on a daily basis, and obviously they are not going to have as much time in
Yes.
doing the analysis that you guys did to identify who actually had the power in the relationship. So FMCG market is very different. But in your experience, have you seen this speed or the fast decision making in any other manufacturing or retail or distribution industries where they might have similar behaviors as the FMCG buyers?
Yeah, I've seen that in retail. So in retail, they're very blue. The buyers are typically very blue, but in FMCG they're also very blue. And and there's a reason for it, because blue is easiest for a buyer, because then they
Yeah,
have multiple options. You can just run their RFPs and just do the exercise, get as much money from the market as possible, and then move on. Right? It's easy. It's short term. It's quick. If you are in a red relationship where it's about partnership, working together, it involves spending a lot of time with your suppliers. It involves a lot of efforts, and especially in FMCG markets, it's quick. In retail as well, they have a quick turnaround of volume of products. It's just moving around so quickly. They don't prefer spending a lot of time on that. That's also why buyers don't like a lot of in FMCG. They don't like a lot of innovation. Even though as a seller you would say, or as a person you would say, everybody loves innovation.
yeah,
But the problem with innovation is, once you are innovating something with your customer, they become dependent on you, because you're the only one who can provide it to
yeah,
them. And you don't want that, because then again, you have one supplier that you can source this innovation from, which means you don't have power in the relationship. And buyers just hate not having power in the relationship. So one of the key things that we were always trained to do in FMCG is understand who are your suppliers. And if
yeah.
you only have one, add more. And if you can't add more, simplify your specification so you can add more. This was the one thinking methodology that we had, just to make sure we had additional suppliers in market, so we can actually run RFPs and leverage the market.
Okay, so let's go back to our manufacturing executive or manufacturing company or the retail company that are actually trying to sell to FMCG, or it could be any other customers that they might be trying to sell to. So first thing, I think there is going to be some effort in analyzing, okay, when you have, let's say, when you are serving 100 or 200 customers or maybe 1,000 customers, and some of them are probably going to be strategic from your perspective because you are trying to sell, and you may have substantial amount of revenue, but this could be a blue relationship from the perspective of the buyer. Your goal always is going to be converting this into the red relationship, because obviously then you have slightly more authority in the relationship. From the buyer's perspective, they are always trying to turn that into blue. I don't know if they will ever try to turn that into red. But is blue always bad, or would you think that there are some cases in which the blue relationship is going to be better for the companies that may be trying to sell their offerings?
Well, when I talk to sales companies or people who are in sales,
Yeah,
they don't prefer to be blue, because it's short term, one off,
yeah,
price focused negotiations. I would say 99% of salespeople are red. It's their preference, because they want to build long term relationship. Because think about it from a bonus perspective, right? So
yeah,
their bonus is typically linked to growth or profits, or a combination of those things. So probably two key things. In a blue relationship, you can grow 1 year, but then you would lose that business for the year after, but you still need to close that gap, because your targets are going to be higher than previous year. So sellers are always red, because they want to be in for the long run, because they want to secure business, preferably for 10 years.
yeah,
Whereas buyers are more in for the short term, because they always want to look at what is the best thing, the best availability on the market that I have. So, I think you triggered something even more important in your question, which was like, what can you do to turn buyers red? Yeah, because
yeah,
if you know they're blue, there's a couple of things you can do actually, and because it's quite crucial. How can you get them to be red? I
yeah,
think one of the key things to do is to become unique. Become unique in what you have to offer, and to believe in the fact that you are unique in what you have to offer. Buyers will always make you believe there's competition, but
yeah,
really, honestly, is there? So when the buyer, they always try to tell you that in an RFP they've invited 5 suppliers and they're all identical. In reality, they're never identical. There's a difference. But for a buyer, it's easy to assume they're identical because then it's just about price. It makes it easier for them to make a decision. But it's really to understand is what makes you unique, and to make sure that the buyer understands what makes you unique. Because the more unique you are with your offering, the less options a buyer has. And the less options they have, the more they have to be read in terms of the relationship with you. So it's all about becoming unique in what you have to offer. And if you're offering something that everybody else is offering, you just have to accept the fact that it's going to be a blue relationship. It's never going to be red. So that's one thing. So the other thing you could do, which is also an interesting one, is if you think about it from a complete organizational perspective. A buyer is blue, however, the rest of their organization is typically red. If you talk about finance, if you talk about IT, if you talk about sales, pretty much everyone in the organization is red because they want an efficient and smooth operation with your organization. IT wants to be connected through EDI connections. The finance, they want to have a smooth invoicing process without any hassle. Everybody wants to work together between customer and suppliers. So the other key thing you could do is find a way of not getting too involved with your buyer. And I know it's a hard thing to do because buyers always want to get involved because that's their role to be involved. That's why they always in these RFP they'll say, you know what, I'm the gatekeeper. You have to go through me. You can't contact anyone else in the organization because they know the rest of the organization is red and commercially not as sensitive as buyers. But they want to avoid you building relationship with the rest of the organization. However, once you do establish a connection with the entire organization and with the entire organization behind the buyer, with their IT and finance department and their supply and quality, you name it, it becomes harder for a buyer to say goodbye to you. Because what happens once an RFP has been launched and an RFP is going to be executed, they're going to align with their internal stakeholders. And if their internal stakeholders say, I can't do without this supplier and you can't get rid of them and I prefer them, they're so great, I love working with them, it becomes harder for a buyer to actually change. And so from a sales perspective, building a strong connection with anyone but the buyer, of course you need to build a strong connection with the buyer as well, but with the rest of the organization can prove to be highly efficient in terms of securing business. Because if the rest of the organization doesn't want to say goodbye to you as a supplier, it makes it harder for the buyer to do so as well.
Yeah, so interesting perspective there, and I can definitely agree that from the seller side, everybody wants to be red. From the buyer side, the entire organization wants to be red, but buyer is probably going to be blue. But if you think about the red relationship, the relationship building is expensive. Okay, and I like to think like a CFO. Okay, and that's why I'm always trying to debate. If let's say if red is so cool, do we all really want to turn red? Is it worth turning ourselves into red? Can we more profitable by being blue? So in your experience, have you seen if blue is always going to be bad strategy? What's your perspective on blue? Do you typically recommend that you should always try to become red, or in some instances blue could also be good?
Well, it depends on your perspective. So red obviously has a longer term and a longer shelf life. It's a longer term relationship. But the other way how you can be blue and have long relationships is by being the most cost efficient organization there is. So if a buyer needs to buy on the market and everybody's offering a price of 100 and you're offering a price of 90, they'll work with you. Because you're the most cost-efficient organization to work with. So there's no risk of losing business because if you provide the service and quality levels to the standards that they require, but your pricing is lower, 90 in this example, they'll continue working with you as long as you stay ahead of the market. There's no problem in doing that. But then you will always have to accept that you're being leveraged, and you need to stay cost competitive forever. If you want to stay in business, then there was no risk of losing business.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your corporate strategy, whether we are thinking more from the buyer perspective or the seller perspective. While red could be awesome, but red is always not good. So I think, if we look at the examples of, let's say, Walmart or Spirit Airlines, their corporate strategy is, you cannot find anything cheaper than what we sell. Their entire organization is aligned towards, how can we be most cost competitive? So it could be either red or blue, it doesn't matter, but you have to figure out what you really want to be, and you need to align your organization completely towards that strategy. What really fires back is when you don't know who you are, whether you are blue or red. I think that's the most common situation that we typically see with a lot of different, buyers and sellers, that they are struggling and they are struggling to communicate that message. Now, I actually want to dig deeper into this unique aspect. And I think that's very important from the seller's perspective. When I look at these sales pitches, right? And we talk a lot about these sales pitches. Everybody in the market thinks that they are super unique. Okay. Yep. Everybody, every salesperson, if you talk to any salesperson, their sales pitches are going to be, hey, I'm so unique because factor number 1, factor number 2, factor number 3, factor number 4. Now, my buyers are thinking, hey, you know what? I have heard these pitches 5,000 times in last 30 days. No. You are not unique at all. In fact, you are bothering me right now with your pitch. Okay, because I don't necessarily care for these factors. So this notion of being unique is sometimes it just overselling, in my opinion. Okay, when you want to be unique, but you really want to mean that you are truly unique from the buyer's perspective that they really care for. So what would be your perspective? What have you seen? When you try to be unique and you are always saying, hey, I'm so unique, buy me. And buyer is saying, you know what? Just get out from here, okay? I don't care for you.
Yeah. Well, honestly speaking, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So when people say how unique they are, I always think, well, there's plenty of others out there who can deliver that service to you. You're absolutely right. It's spot on comment. A lot of sellers believe they are unique, and I guess the thing you can do about on that is it's something I mentioned earlier. If you really want to be truly unique, you need to do really specific, customer-specific work, right? So we had suppliers. They're trying to get in through the back door, very smart, by approaching, for example, the marketing organization. And marketing is very red as well in terms of their behavior, right? So they always think about innovation opportunities. So what they would do, those sales organizations, they would go to marketeers and they would sell, I don't know, great ideas, fantastic concepts. Marketeers would be extremely excited, thinking, this could actually work. And then, they would get themselves involved in that process quite intensively, to a point where basically the marketeers said, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to use that supplier. Procurement or buying team, you just sign it off. At that stage, buying team had no power anymore, in terms of doing anything, because it was something that was uniquely created. Might have even been some IP involved, intellectual property involved, which was hard to actually, find suppliers that could do the same thing, because it was something unique that was created for this organization. So that was an approach that really worked well in those days. I also saw it happening in manufacturing. When you're dealing with technicians, if you ask a technician, what do you want? What do you prefer? Do you want an off-the-rack machine, or do you want something specifically for you that's really tailored to your needs and blah 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 desires? Well, if you ask a technician, they always want something tailored to their unique needs, right? And as a supplier of machines, this was exactly the approach they should take. It's bypassing the buyer, getting these technicians enthusiastic and energized, developing something completely unique that nobody else could make, and then just the sign off from the buyer was just a formality, because the buyer had no real leverage on the supplier. Buyers didn't like that much, right? So they always struggle with these kind of engineers, because they were always working behind the buyer's backs, and buyers were always trying to get involved in these negotiations, which was a hard thing to do. But that's one way of becoming unique. Just assuming, as you mentioned, that whatever product you have is unique. I would be careful assuming that straight away. So one of the things I do with potential with some of my customers, actually do this analysis. Who are your competitors? What do they offer? And what makes you unique? And you typically find out that 80-90% of your portfolio is absolutely not unique at all. There's many others who can provide it, and only a small fraction could be unique. Like, for example, it's focused on sustainability or whatever. But then the second question is a buyer actually interested in that? And do they care about that unique feature at all? That's also the second part of the analysis, really understanding what are the needs from the buyer. And just asking one simple question to a buyer, which in my career, I haven't had a lot of sales professionals ask this one fundamental question to me. And it's question, Mark, what are your key priorities this year? very few salespeople ask it, but understanding exactly that helps you to provide something unique to the buyer. Very few salespeople actually do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, when we look at this deep understanding of your customers, deeply informed about what their key priorities are going to be, sometimes it's just harder for people. I don't know if it is because of the lack of the information that they have, or they have not worked enough in that specific market or the industry. But being informed about the key priorities. Now you can go and ask your customer that, oh, hey, tell me your key priorities, and he's like, you know what, I don't have time for you. I'm not going to tell you. Okay, figure it out and come back. Okay, and tell me what I really care for, and if you have something that you are going to offer, then I may probably consider. And the other aspect of the example that you mentioned about the technician story, where everybody wants the tailored experience, but tailored experience is extremely expensive. Okay. If you ask them, okay, you know what? I will give you the tailored experience. Are you willing to pay for that? And I think that's similar to the story that you had mentioned originally, where they wanted those services because their quarterly goals were aligned with that, but then they didn't want to pay for it. And that's why they did not clear the invoices. So sometimes, they all want, but I mean, when it comes to paying, nobody likes to pay, in my opinion, unless they have that fear of losing that. Then they figure, oh, you know what? I cannot live without it. And, I definitely have to pay. So what would be your thoughts overall in this story, whatever I mentioned, related to this uniqueness, and uniqueness being expensive, and you have to figure out whether the customer truly care for the uniqueness before becoming unique in your market segment?
Yeah, so there is, from a buying perspective, uniqueness.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Means more expensive.
Yeah,
but there's actually it's a double whammy, because uniqueness, a unique product, also means there are less suppliers, which means it's more expensive. And so it's uniqueness, because if something's really tailor made, off the rack is 100, but if you tailor make it, it's some additional things being done to it, etc. It's going to be 120. But the fact that it's unique means probably there's also only one supplier who can provide it, which means once they know they're the only one who can provide it, this 120 will then become 140. And so it's a double whammy for buyers. So and that's what I mentioned a bit earlier. As a buyer, you don't like uniqueness. As a seller, you should like it because it allows you to increase your profitability, and increase your margins or your pricing. As a buyer, you don't like uniqueness. You want industry standard as much as possible, because on the one hand, industry standard is cheap, but industry standard also means you have more suppliers to source from, which means you can leverage the market and therefore get the best prices from it.
Yeah. So when I look at this aspect of uniqueness from the buyer's perspective, there are always going to be some sort of substitutes, even if you feel that you are truly unique and you don't necessarily have any other competition who can probably provide that. But there are always going to be some alternatives that these buyers can consider. It could be just doing, let's say, if you are selling some sort of software, then it could be managing it internally or managing through manual process, or using some sort of workaround. Even in case of if you are selling machine, you can probably live with your old machine. So even if you're, as a seller, even if you're thinking that, you are purely unique, but buyers, when it comes to paying, they can always figure out that, okay, how can I not pay for this? Because they don't want to pay for it unless they truly care for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is to do with how is a buyer going to spend their time? We talked about the fast moving consumer good. They don't have a lot of time. So if as a buyer you have 100 million in terms of your spend in total category, and you're an 80 million euro or dollar supplier, of course they're going to spend time on you. If you're like a 500,000 $500,000 supplier, they don't care as much for you. So their interest will be linked as well to how big and important are you to them, and also what opportunity is there associated with it. Can I save 20% if I would leverage the market and run an RFP? Yes or no? So even if you are unique, you can do two things. If you are unique, you can do two things. So you can actually say, right, now I can use that to increase my profit margin significantly. Or you can just use it subtly by saying, I'm going to slightly increase my prices, but I'm not going to do any crazy stuff, because the more crazy stuff I do, and the more a buyer feels that they're pushed with their back against the wall, the more they will fight to get out of that situation, and the more they will do to, I don't know, downgrade specifications or find alternative suppliers or prove that you're not unique or whatever they will do. So don't make them focus their attention to you, because a buyer has limited time. They can't focus their attention on everything. They need to be choiceful. So don't be the one that's on the radar screen of a buyer saying, right, I don't like being pressured here. I need to do something about it.
Okay, so let's say if I am the manufacturing or the e-commerce executive who is actually trying to sell to these buyers who are super fast in their decision making, and they are super price sensitive as well. So let's say if I want to start on this process of removing this price sensitivity from the equation, what will be my process? Am I selecting few customers that are going to be better or superior from the red relationship perspective? Should I be researching on every single customer? How can I start on the process? Do you have any advice for an executive?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would always do is there's this 80-20 rule. If you have 20% of your customers that probably account for 80% of your turnover.
Yeah.
Right? So let's focus on this 80% turnover, 20% of your suppliers, which is then the 80% of the turnover. So focus on the big ones, and just start by making this assessment. Are they blue or are they red in a relationship? Let's just start with that, because we're now assuming that all buyers are blue. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case. If they are red, understand, how can I make sure they stay there? What can I do to make them stay there? So that's the first question. So because you want them to be red, because when they're red, you'll have great relationship partnerships, and pricing will not be much of an issue because they love working with you and all that kind of thing. So what the red ones, keep them there. The question is, what is your approach going to be for the blue ones? Are you going to be blue? Or are you going to make them red? Or are you going to just make sure you're the most cost effective organization, so whenever they run their RFPs that you're going to win anyway? I think for these, you need to decide what your approach is going to be. And it could be, going through becoming more intimate with your customer in terms of connecting at all layers of the organization rather just a sales buying connection. It could be about, your service offering to them. Is it going to be different? How can I become unique? Or like I mentioned, becoming cost competitive and making sure you just win these RFPs based on, the lowest cost that you have in the market. So, but that would require an individual approach to each organization.
Okay, this was a powerful insight, Mark. That's it for today. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think we talked a lot about red and blue, but I think one of the key things I want people to remember from this conversation is that if you want to be successful in growing your business, and just thinking it well from a sales perspective, if you really want to grow your business and be successful at sales, you need to understand how your buyer thinks. Because if you don't know how your buyer thinks, you're not going to be successful at sales. So that's what I really want people to remember. You can only be successful if you really want to make a difference. You need to think like a buyer.
Yeah, and my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, have that deep understanding of your customers, where they are in their journey, whether they are blue or red. Both strategies could be equally effective as long as you know what your buyers are and aligning your corporate strategies towards the interest of those buyers. On that note, Mark, I want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode. I absolutely enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thank you for having me on, Sam. I really appreciate it.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Mark, head over to ROI-10.com. It's ROI-0.com. And check his book, The Other Side of Sales, on Amazon. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Jill Robbins, who discusses how to navigate long-term sales cycles that involves selling to and through procurement. Also, the interview with Andrew Deutsch, who discusses pricing and discounting strategies for companies. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, Please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.